And this was interesting sitting in a room with this guy, is he said at some point, he said, if push came to shove, I could strangle her. And he said he always talked about beating her. And the inmate told me that when he would talk about strangling her, the inmate actually demonstrated this. He would put his hands out and his arms out and wrench them like he had somebody's neck, and his face would get angry. So he was visually showing the inmate that I could strangle her. And he said he would really get intense when he did that.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Kecia Hughes, Part 3. Welcome back to the Murder Police Podcast. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
The last time we left off, our listeners may recall, Troy had confessed to killing Kecia by means of strangulation. He confessed this in an interview with you, I believe, David, right?
Correct.
Now, what did the autopsy reveal that was so important?
Yeah, we'll get to that because the autopsy happened a few days later, and it might be a better way to put it, what it didn't reveal. And I'll talk about that in just a second, because after he does that and we're through, he's officially charged with murder. You fill out a citation and you write the word murder on it, and he's taken over to the corrections facility, which is our Fayette County Community Corrections here in Lexington, and he's housed there. The thing is that the minute that he's arrested is you have probable cause. And arguably probable cause was coming together real well at the scene, is why he was detained and taken into custody on the circumstantial evidence with that alone. His confession and his admission to the elements of it really added to that quite a bit. But the reality of it is in a case, specifically one of these, where the suspect is kind of dropped in your lap, and we talked about how difficult it is to go into an interview rather cold on that, is tons of work goes on after the arrest. The other detectives we've interviewed have talked about that same thing, and we've got some cases where the post-investigation was just mind-boggling. I remember the murder of Umi Southworth. If people want to hear something that talked about some incredible information that was discovered in the wake of that arrest before it ever went to trial, that's a good one. It'll point to that same fact, and this one's no different. So what ends up happening is other detectives and the whole team continue discussions with family and friends and co-workers to continue to establish some kind of a victimology. Like, what do we know about Kecia and her life to kind of help guide this and look for motivators and influences in the case. And also, we tended to identify some more indications of prior violent acts by him, which starts to show a pattern. For example, many of the people that were friends and family knew that there were real dangers in the relationships based on what she would tell people, especially when she's talking about leaving him, is they knew there was a real past. And also neighbors that lived real close in the apartment would report hearing arguments in the past. None of them saw anything, but they could hear the two arguing. So in the wake of that same afternoon, the crime scene is being processed by the Forensic Services Unit, by the evidence technicians and detectives that do that. And Kecia's vehicle, where Troy was located in, has been towed to our facility, and based on search warrants, it's being processed as well. Further investigation by our domestic violence unit revealed a significant history of domestic violence charges and protective orders in Louisville, Kentucky, dating back to 1996, and those are pretty important too. Again, they yield a lot of information about the history between Kecia and Troy and his propensity to violence. We also do a little bit of work on the suspect, obviously, on, just like we do victimology on a victim, we want to know more about the suspect, including where they're employed or have been employed. And in this case, it paid off a lot, because when we started following up his last employment, we found that on January 2nd, 1999, he failed to show up at work at 10 p.m. like he was scheduled to do so. This is really important to find out and then get good verifiable records on this, because you're trying to set people into confirmed timelines of where we can prove they were and they weren't. And in this case, had Troy thought about it and offered that in an interview as part of an alibi, that would have been really good to strike that. And it could come up later. Yeah, who knows what he's going to testify to later. So we had that. The interesting thing is when the detectives went and talked to the people at his place of employment, a supervisor actually heard him say, if I have to spend New Year's Eve with Kecia, I'll probably end up killing her. And that was on New Year's Eve. That's a powerful statement. Powerful. It talks about who he is again. Myself, I remember a few days later on January 3rd, actually the next day, is I did a crime scene walkthrough. I didn't do it the same day that we had the case go out.
So you did this walkthrough some 1 or 2 days later after she had passed, correct?
Absolutely.
So why did you wait 1 or 2 days? Why didn't you go that day?
We usually didn't go right into those scenes. The scene integrity in these investigations is mission critical. The whole goal of the people that are working these scenes is to reduce the foot traffic of anybody coming and going from those scenes. And even if we were lead or primary on one of these investigations, most of the time, we never entered into the scene. It would have to be an exceptional case to go see something, but we never went into the scene until the county coroner and the forensics unit gave us an indication that they processed the scene to the best of their ability and recovered everything and documented everything to the best of their ability. And then what we do, it's called a walkthrough. On a walkthrough, we would wait and do a walkthrough to aid in the decision as to when that open that scene back up. For example, this would have to be cleaned and things like that. But it was very important to stay out of that scene because we didn't want to be a contamination element or take anything into the scene or leave it. So we always waited. And I remember some of the things that struck me is going back to the bedroom and seeing where she had been found. And again, she was moving quickly into some advanced states of decomposition. But what was bizarre too was throughout the apartment were several air fresheners, like air wicks, the kinds you pull up. And I mean, many. I can't imagine how many there were, but there are more than we would want in our house or anybody else's.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the significance of that? Because we also have those plugged into our walls and setting about, as you know.
Yeah, but not this many. It was crazy. What it expresses is that, like I said, when somebody's body is moving through decomposition, the smell is really, really rough. A lot of people tell you once you smell that specifically, you'll never forget it. What it leans into, though, is that Troy was there, that he wasn't gone, and that comes up in a few minutes. It's very important in that aspect, but that means he's there, and he's hanging out with her body in there, and to fight that odor, he's going and getting these air fresheners and putting them up, which is kind of ghoulish, if you think about it, that I'm going to stay here. And then when we talk about the alibi in a little bit, that even strengthens part of what that was.
Well, let me ask you, and I know this may be moving forward a little, but I'm wondering, other people maybe as well, did he have an idea of ultimately what he was going to do with her body? Because the air fresheners are only going to work so long. Did he have an end game of where he was going to take her?
Hard to say. And I'm glad you asked that because actually at the scene, the way the bedding was pulled and moved, and I'd forgotten about this until you said something. The way the bedding was arranged and pulled and off the side a little bit, there's a part of me that believed, and we never firmed this up with him, I believe he tried to move her. And because of the way things were shuffled off to the side, she was a little bit in a bloated condition. This was going to be much more difficult, and there is such a thing as dead weight. And Troy is not a very stout guy. So I'm glad you asked that. I think that. However, when we get to what I think is one of the most articulate alibi attempts I've seen, we'll see why that might not have been the case. But I think he was going to move her. I think that was his first move is maybe, can I get her outside of the car?
But still then, it leads to, ultimately, where are you going to take her?
That's it. All of that requires a follow-up. I think this was at least a second-story apartment, and I think he tried to pull, it really looked like that bedding was being slid off of that bed and onto the floor. Funny, I'm glad you asked that. That's a memory I'd forgotten about until I remembered walking in that scene.
So we know that an autopsy was performed on January 4th by Dr. Greg Davis, and our listeners, let me just interject here. We have actually done an interview with Greg on pathology. And if you've not listened to that, please go back and listen, because Greg is so knowledgeable in his field, and he's really just, well, I thought he gave a great interview for us, and he's just a really good guy. However, side note, so the autopsy was performed on January 4th by Dr. Greg Davis. What results did that show?
I think what was interesting is, again, is that he conducted that. That's where I got to know him. And again, if you listen to the podcast, he's a teacher, and he was a teacher at the autopsy table as well. Here's what's significant, and this starts to really paint a different picture of things. Based on his autopsy examination, he found no anatomical cause of death. Now that's bizarre. I've got a guy that's admitted to strangling his wife, and in actuality, this isn't that rare. But absent a confession, this could get very difficult.
Well, sure, especially since there's no evidence of any damage to the soft tissue. So had Troy not made a confession, he may have walked on this.
That could interject into it. And even with a confession, there's always some arguments to be made, because you're right. In some strangulations, you might have damage to things like the neck and the esophagus and the larynx and tracheal and cervical spine and the laryngeal and the facial nerves. You can have petechiae. You can have all kinds of indicators and things like that, and none of those were there.
Well, and not to mention bruising on her throat.
Exactly, all those visual things. And now I'm sure one thing that might have played a role in this too is the fact that she was moving through decomp. That always can mask a few things, but even inside those tissues, inside the neck, they weren't damaged. And you hit the nail on the head that has no physical evidence of the strangulation claim. So you have an acknowledgement, an admission, but I'm telling you, you really want more than that, because if for some reason we lost that confession, if in a suppression hearing, if there was a problem with that, then you're left without. So that's kind of a weird thing. And also on the alibi I'll talk about in a minute, this is one thing that I don't even think Troy knew, obviously, but it would have fortified his alibi attempt if my theory was correct on that. The big thing is that what they did is they went ahead and furthered this on and asked for some more examination by a well-known forensic anthropologist, Dr. Emily Craig.
Well, let me ask, why did they forward this on to her? Was it because Dr. Davis couldn't find any evidence?
Right, is that she's more gifted in, that's what forensic anthropology is that she's more gifted in looking at the bone structures and things like that. Now, Dr. Craig a lot of times came into cases and where you found remains. She was very gifted in that.
And if I recall correctly, was she not the forensic anthropologist who did the autopsy of Haley McCone?
Exactly.
Which is another one of our cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Listeners haven't heard, one of my personal favorites.
Yeah. That was Emily. I remember sitting on Haley's case, going up there and spending an entire day with Dr. Craig, and we had Haley's body bag out and going through that with a magnifying glass, literally, tweezers and small tins, looking for hair, fiber, anything we could find in that bag. She's another person that was very educational to work with. Well, between her examination and some more investigation working with our partners in Louisville, Kentucky on those prior assaults, they had found that Kecia's hyoid, which is a little U-shaped bone in the neck, was actually fractured. But it didn't happen in this assault. It was fractured earlier from one of Troy's assaults on Kecia in Louisville and healed over. That's what you're looking for in a strangulation, and that tissue damage and cartilage damage we talked about. However, what we found was an older one, which was just sad that it, again, paints that picture of that violence that she was suffering
Well,
through.
Right, and it leads credence to it's not the first time he had put his hands on her throat, let alone on her person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So those are some twists and turns in there. And again, all of this is happening after arrest. It's all kind of starting to come together. It's information you don't have in the interview, but you start to piece this together, good and bad of it and everything. And they fall into this alibi. The alibi on this one is amazing. And I wish I'd had some of this information in the interview and could have worked through it. But again, we didn't. During the search of Kecia's car that Troy was driving when they took him into custody, Detective Bill Ramsey, with the Evidence Collection Unit at the time, found a hotel receipt in an envelope in the front passenger floorboard from a Fairfield Inn in Collinsville, Illinois, which, just to let people know, is well over 300 miles away from Lexington, and well over a 7-hour drive by car in the best of weather, on good without traffic and road conditions.
Now, this was Kecia's car or Troy's car?
It was Kecia's, but it wasn't a trip with Kecia that we could tell. And here's what was interesting is you take that receipt, a folio as we would call it, and I contacted the hotel staff in Collinsville, Illinois. And here's the interesting thing I found, and this is why, again, this alibi attempt was actually pretty incredible. But according to the staff, and they were able to verify from their audit records unequivocally that this happened, is that A. Troy Hughes checked into the hotel on Saturday, January 2nd, 1999 at 4:18 p.m. Central Standard Time, which would have been 5:18 Eastern Standard Time here in Lexington, and actually provided a driver's license for Troy Hughes with his picture on it. Now, think about when this is it. I mean, this is like, did he drive up there after the murder? That's possibly.
Well, and let's not forget, he did not show at his job that same day at 10 that evening.
Yeah, but here's the twist. This is the part. So, okay, it makes sense. Is that in theory you've got somebody that has moved and taken off like you would think people do after they kill. And at the same time now you start looking back and you're like, but there are all those air fresheners in the house. You know, there was a significant amount of time spent in that house, but here he is somewhere else. And here's the kicker. According to hotel records, A. Troy Hughes checked out on Sunday, January 3rd, the next day, at 11:58 p.m. Central Standard Time. So now we're talking roughly 1 o'clock here in Lexington. And the hotel advised that back then, too, that a lot of the roads and interstates were shut down during that time for ice and snow. That's important because now that travel time of 7.5 hours has increased dramatically if you could travel at all. Here's the thing.
Well, now let me pause you. You keep referring to him as A. Troy Hughes. So that's either leading me to believe that two people have these same names with the same driver's license that lives in Lexington, or is there something else about, quote, A. Troy Hughes?
Here it is. If people were paying attention when we started the case, is that right around the same time that Troy is spotted in the area of the apartment, has a small vehicle pursuit and runs on foot, and they take him into custody. That Troy Hughes, which actually being detained at 2 p.m., 1 p.m. back in Central Standard Time on January 3rd, the same time frame he checked out of a hotel over 7 hours away in good driving conditions. So what that looks like is that somebody at least checked out of that hotel, identifying themselves as Troy, and likely checked into that hotel with a driver's license that had Troy on it, because the timing doesn't work out real good even for leaving and going into weather that bad to get to the hotel. But either way, for sure, whoever left that hotel could not have been our Troy Hughes, and they knew somebody checked out personally at the desk when he did that.
Okay, so did you question him with this during the interview? Or did you not know this during the interview?
Didn't know it. So again, there's the challenge, right? Is this would have been fantastic to really try to take and get out of him during the interview, or at least try to bring up, because I would have liked to have known who that person was. I would have liked it if he had maybe tried to lay that alibi out for us, because remember, we've told you and we've told the audience before that if you're not going to tell us the truth, we like really good lies. And this would have been a really good lie because we had all this information that would have countered all of that. But of course, the biggest one being that he's personally at the scene during this time is gigantic. So it becomes a lost topic. And people might ask, well, did you find out who that person was? And unfortunately, we didn't. Because of the way their suspect rights are, once they get into the hearing through arraignment and whatnot, we don't have the access to them like we did before, so it becomes kind of a lost topic. And in actuality, as much as curiosity would want me to find out who that person was, it probably isn't a priority at this point in the investigation, as odd as that seems. It becomes more of a curiosity.
Did you ever ask him about this, or did you never have the opportunity?
Never had the opportunity. You just can't. The protections on them speaking to us become very innate past the preliminary hearing. I mean, they're invoked on their behalf, and the only time you'd get that is with the presence of and permission of their attorney, which isn't likely in a case like this anyway. So this is what it looks like. And why he kind of messed this up, and he was going to benefit from something he didn't even know happened. is you strangle your wife. You maybe attempt to remove her body, maybe not, but plan B or a good plan, and this might be something that got planned for some time, is that what if you simply drive home on the 3rd or the 4th, you come through all that weather, you go to your door, and your story to the police is, I didn't get an answer at the door, I opened the key, came back, and much to my shock, I found my wife deceased back in the back bedroom where she was found. And all of a sudden, you've got a record of you being in this other city. You've got a record of you checking in. I mean, I had a fax sent to me with a photocopy of his license. And then you've got a record that you're checking out, and then you drive back. And where he would have got bonus points that he didn't even know about is the fact that her anatomical cause of death wasn't readily available in that autopsy. So what it would have been, it's kind of scary, is probably a pending investigation. Is that without a real cause of death, with him having what would have looked like a good alibi, this would have been really kind of scary. Is that this might have just stayed pending for a while and unresolved. Where he messed up is he got seen there at the apartment that morning, and he got seen in the area. Had he waited till later in the evening or the next morning to roll in and open that door and find her, this could have turned out altogether differently.
Oh, certainly. Did you ever get video footage of who the person was in Illinois?
No, they had nothing like that. And keep in mind, in time frame, we're talking back in 1999. If video was around then, it's nothing like the quality we have now. You know, a big thing that we couldn't stand back then in those days was even with bank robberies is video was really horrible. Anything on video was bad. They would replay over tapes. Nothing like that existed for this. And again, at some point, you have to look at it and balancing the workload you already have is that, am I satisfying a curiosity or is it really integral to the case? And we didn't have anything in the case that said whoever this suspect was or this person was that did this had any other involvement other than that. Could have been, but we didn't have anything that said that.
So he's in jail. And then on January 14th of 99, his case gets waived to the grand jury, correct?
Yeah. On the 14th, we had what's called a felony preliminary hearing. And in Kentucky, and this could be different in different places, is that when you're taken into custody and from the date you're arraigned in Kentucky, the court system has 10 days to get you in front of what's called a preliminary hearing. What happens at a preliminary hearing is that the defendant's attorneys can actually question the probable cause on taking somebody into custody. This is where they're going to start to work the first holes in the case if they can. What they're looking for is they're not trying the case yet. There's not a whole lot. It's not really complicated. Sometimes they'll ask a detective or an officer a lot of questions. What happens is you'll come in, you'll swear in. The judge will ask you to tell you about your case. You'll go through a summary of the case. What you're delivering is the probable cause of why they're in custody. You're not convicting them at this moment, but you're talking about that. The defense sometimes will ask questions to try to hammer away at that to see if there's leaks in that. But sometimes they also do what they did here today, and they waive it. And waive it means is they're not going to question the officer. They're simply going to accept the fact that probable cause likely existed at that moment, and they waive it to the next step, which is called the grand jury. And that's scheduled within about 60 days out.
So we know also that the following week, a search warrant was granted for biosamples from him. So he was taken to one of our local hospitals, which then was called Good Samaritan Hospital. What kind of biosamples was retrieved from him?
Yeah, this time just blood. Back in 1999, is we just took him. And what you do is you do an affidavit for a search warrant or a court order. You take that to a judge. You give them the probable cause why you want to take this body fluid from somebody, which is a little more invasive than searching their house or their car, right? There's going to be a needle involved.
Yeah, because some of people like me would not go down without screaming over a blood removal.
Yeah, they'd have to sit on your shoulders probably. But you go and you grab some other police and you just simply pick these people up, sign them out of the jail, take them to the facility, show them the warrant, you go ahead and I've never had anybody really fight this. They go ahead and let the staff go ahead and take any kind of samples we've asked for in the warrant.
Now, did you take him for that?
I did, yeah.
Did he say anything to you during that transportation?
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. The only thing he asked is what it was for, which that's reasonable. And I told him, well, for DNA. And of course, we're looking for trace evidence that might make a connection back then and everything. So A lot of times they don't, but I've had some of them talk your ear off, which I don't think I've had anybody talk my ear off and really move the case forward or backward or anything. But I mean, sometimes they just like chatty Cathy's. And,
so he was not a chatty Cathy.
No, not at all. He was pretty quiet. But I've had some, though, that it was like you and me going to lunch like we're catching up. I mean, it's crazy, but it just depends on who they are. But I don't think I've had any one of them really incriminate themselves in those conversations. And we were pretty careful about that, to be honest with you. That if they just said something in the car, you could probably use that. But at the same time, you got to be careful about never looking like you're trying to pry for that. Because, again, there's some invocations of some rights that come into place because they've been arraigned. You've got to be that's a very, very icy slope to go on to if you play with that too much.
Now, we know moving forward from this, some 10 months later, you get letters from some inmates housed at Federal Corrections Center in Manchester, Kentucky. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. As I got a letter from an inmate, and I'm not going to name these people. They seem like pretty good people, and I think their intentions were well. But I get a letter, very polite handwritten letter from an inmate, and he's at FCI Manchester, which is a couple hours from here in Lexington. And he basically is offering information that while he was in custody at one point with Troy, that Troy made some statements that we might be interested in. Now, this is what we would typically just call, a lot of people hear them called jailhouse informants.
Jailhouse informants, tell our listeners what that is.
Well, what it is it's just like it sounds. You've got somebody that's in custody or been in custody, and they claim that they were in custody and had contact, for example, cellmates or in a break room with one of the people in your target in your investigation, and they want to offer information. They're tricky. It's very risky. And you have to be very careful, you have to be very cautious when you enter down this road to work with these people. For example, you would never base your case fundamentally on a jailhouse informant statement. It's just because the reason they're doing this is pretty selfish. But just like every other information source we get, we try to evaluate what the motivator is on that. In this case, most of the time, now you can have some people that honestly will just do this because it's right. But in this case, and it worked out this way, they were willing to help, but they were politely asking for maybe some assistance or recommendation in having a sentence reduced, or, for example, in the federal system, what they might ask for is, if I cooperate, if it's valid, I'm interested in maybe being moved to a facility closer to my family. Because in the federal system, you can be shipped way far away from your family. So as long as you understand those motivators and you're willing to testify to those motivators, because in court you'll get asked, well, why did they do this? Well, they wanted to take a shot at having a 30-year trafficking sentence reduced or be eligible for parole earlier.
Well, and then you also have to wonder the validity of it. Are they telling the truth, or are they just trying to make it sound pretty plausible, but they're wanting that leniency or that move on their sentence?
That some will lie. You're right. They'll put it together. So what you end up doing is you want to gauge the motivation. You understand going in at whatever they tell you, you're probably going to have to corroborate another way. The other thing you have to do is, and this sounds kind of stupid to some people, but you have to verify, were they in jail on these dates, and was your target in jail on these dates? And then you need to find records in the facility that show there was an opportunity for them to actually have contact. So we've seen that before, where you'll go looking and you're like, you two were never in jail at the same time. This couldn't have happened. So you dismiss that when it goes in the file as a liar, pretty much. But in this case, everything validated they were together. And actually, circumstantially, these did get used in the case because we'd never based the case on them, but they really talked about who Troy was. And I said in the beginning that we were going to talk more about how we figured out what kind of person he was.
So we know that one jailhouse informant had offered some information from the year prior with Troy. What kind of information did he share with you?
Yeah, this was interesting. You're right that he had claimed he was incarcerated with Troy in 1998, and before Troy was released, they had met and had conversations. And this was interesting. He said that Troy always talked of problems that he had with his wife, and would always fall back saying that it was because she just didn't respect him. And Troy evidently really demanded and wanted respect from Kecia. He made constant references to the fact that he should kill her, and that he also stated that if they were in a foreign country where it was legal, he'd be allowed to kill her for some of the things that she's done to him.
So he's wanting respect, but he's willing to kill, which in my opinion is a little worse, than the respect he's demanding, which kind of would make me wonder, what are we dealing with here? You're going to kill someone because they're not respecting you. I don't know, maybe that's just my opinion, but...
No, yeah, it's a part of that whole pattern of who he is as an abuser, and his mindset is that it's so much bigger than chauvinism or misogyny at this point. He's actually saying that if you lived in a foreign country, for example, in some countries where this is legal, on honor killing and things like that he'd be allowed to kill her for some of the things that she did to him. And those are usually based on just lacks of respect or his perception that she was having an affair. The guy told me, too, that he got interested in the Muslim faith in prison, but he said that what became very apparent after a while is he really thinks the only reason he got drawn to that is because his perception of Muslim faith regarding women is that he really believes that he would, for example, say that they were to stay covered and to walk 3 steps behind men. And those were his perceptions of why he was drawn to the Muslim faith. And when he joined, this inmate told me that they kind of asked him not to be around him anymore because they said that's all he would talk about. And it got real clear that he wasn't entering into that faith to express the faith like any other person would do, but because of his perceptions of what it meant on how he could, quote unquote, maybe control Kecia.
Now, we know also, you said prior, that he was more or less a hindrance to people because he always wanted to talk about his wife. And it's not like with you, how you just dote on me. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Probably
180 degrees different.
Yeah,
exactly.
So.
Yeah, is that I'm not stupid. You've seen all episodes of Forensic Files, and probably all 4 of them, because that's all they ever made. And I'm pretty sure that
they do have Forensic Files too.
Yeah,
so.
and
2 out now.
Yeah, that wood chipper you bought for me last year, I'm not stupid. We've never used it. So, but other than that, yeah, again, I think that's what this guy got across, is that he was a pain in the butt, because that's all he talked about, and his anger that he carried, and that's all they heard about. It was like a broken record. And you know what was, when I interviewed this one, he told me about 2 other people that might have information. So we went back out on another day. I couldn't contact all of them before. Met with another one. And this one had been incarcerated with Troy before, like in 1997, like October through December. And he said the same thing. Let me tell you something real quick, though. He did not say the same thing. When you're listening to statements from people, if they match too much, almost word for word, and everything's in step, then you get a little suspicious, because that begins to sound like something repeated or rehearsed. But this guy seemed very sincere. He said that when they were together, he always talked about the marital problems with Kecia, and that she had missed a couple visits to him in the institution, and how that really made him mad. And that several times that he made indications that if she ever tried to leave him, he would hurt her. There's your domestic violence pathology right there. And he said that she was just using him, was not treating him respectfully. So there's that same tone. And this was interesting, sitting in a room with this guy, is he said at some point, he said, if push came to shove, I could strangle her. And he said he always talked about beating her. And the inmate told me that when he would talk about strangling her, the inmate actually demonstrated this. He would put his hands out and his arms out and wrench them like he had somebody's neck, and his face would get angry. So he was visually showing the inmate that I could strangle her. And he said he would really get intense when he did that.
Well, and we know from the autopsy with Dr. Craig, he had done that at one point without killing her.
Amen.
So we know he's at least brought her to the brink of death, if not choked her till she probably thought she was dying. And how sad that ultimately he ended up doing it again and taking her life.
Oh, absolutely.
So let me backtrack a little. You had said previously that sometimes these informants are looking for some sort of motivation or leniency on a sentence, or to be moved closer to their families. Did any of these informants ever request of you a favor, if you will?
Yep, the first one did. And to get people to understand is you don't go in and vouch for them. That's inappropriate. You don't know who they are. But there was a particular federal hearing I went to in Louisville for the first one. And basically, the federal judge is asking 2 things. Did the inmate offer information? And that's a yes. And did the inmate's information appear to be true? And did it help with the case you were investigating? And that was a firm yes. Now, I can't remember. I think they did kind of skin a little time. He was in there for trafficking. He had a 30-year sentence. But I do believe they at least made him eligible for release a little bit earlier. At least that's what I heard later. The second one, I don't think we ever got asked. I don't know if he worked that out through the prosecutor's office, the Commonwealth attorney. And then there was a third one. But to be honest with you, when I went and saw the third one, I felt like I was in the scene from Raising Arizona. as he just stood there and smiled. And I really think that he just wanted a visitor. So we talked for a few minutes and I left.
A better visitor.
Exactly.
Than you?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I'll be candid. Most police don't feel real comfortable walking into federal prisons. I'm just going to tell you, I don't think I could work there. And you're not going to get a lot of Christmas cards and suit and jam of the month clubs if you're a cop in a federal prison. So
likely not.
Yeah. So I didn't feel comfortable with that. But those are those things in the back of a case that are going on. And I think that's what I wanted to share, is that there's so much detail that goes into it. You know, in between the time that he's arrested and we're documenting these other things and putting these in the file and validating when people are in custody and validating when people are at work and validating when they're doing hotel rooms, in the meantime, the whole thing is based on the fact that it's moving through the system. We've been to the grand jury and he's been indicted well before now. And it's just simply waiting on trial dates, which are soon to come.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police Podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.